and alive. This is the Voice of Vietnam, broadcasting from Hanoi, capital of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Our programs for American GIs can be heard at 16:30 hours Saigon time.
Hello, I'm Scott Simon, and this is Vietnam Radio First Termer, a program from National Public Radio produced by Interlock Media Associates in Boston. The devastating North Vietnamese offensive on the eve of the Tet holiday in 1968 marked the turning point in the war. The conflict moved from remote provinces to the heart of Saigon.
I felt when I arrived in Vietnam in 1969 in the wake of the Tet offensive that there was a very deliberate glossing over of the bad news on Armed Forces Radio.
CIA agent Frank Snepp didn't need AFVN to tell him what was going on. Still,
the omission was glaring. Tucking the news in 5 minutes of a feed from the United States when you're sitting across from a firefight on the other side of the Saigon River. I mean, that's the reality, the mismatch of realities that I'm talking about. It's the rationing of the news rather than the censoring of the news that was most significant. If you were operating in intelligence and listening to Armed Forces Radio, because a kind of cynicism sets in. And once you get cynical, and in the intelligence business, you can begin rationalizing lots of things, lots of excesses. And Armed Forces Radio was a factor in making a lot of us a lot harder and maybe even nastier than we needed to be, because it was a factor in shaping our perception of reality and the cause we were serving. And you knew the pap that was being peddled on Armed Forces Radio. Your reaction was to sort of shrug and say, well, why should I report the truth when the truth has no audience?
UPI field correspondent Bill Riley interviewed troops in the field. They often complained they were not being given the complete truth.
There's always a lot of rumors, though, around fighting outfit, isn't there?
I hear a new rumor every day just about. One bad thing about this place is that, well, you don't know, you're not informed enough. I haven't heard too much news from the battle, but just that we won, you know, and they gave us a body count. Personally, I didn't see that many VC up there or NVA up there. That they said they counted 714 NVA killed on that battle, but they must have dug them up or something, or figured it out some way. I'm not sure myself whether we won that battle or not.
Thank you very much, Private First Class Harold Head of High Point, North Carolina.
If you go into a scrap and just get really chewed up and lose almost everybody, and you manage to crawl out of there and have your nervous breakdowns and lick your wounds and hope you got a few days of doping off before they come at you again or send you out in the paddies again.
Former Army Information Officer Michael McCusker, he listened to reports over AFVN of firefights he'd just been in.
In the latest round of rocket and mortar attacks, the U.S. command says about 25 Allied bases and South Vietnamese towns were shelled, but overall damage and casualties are light.
Began to realize they're talking about us, you know, that bloody slaughter we just managed to crawl through. Now is suddenly we won again, you know.
Spokesman said an estimated 2 enemy battalions attacked a 25th Infantry Division outpost and lost 198 men. U.S. casualties were 13 dead and 3 wounded.
I don't think hardly at any time were any casualties as heavy unless it fit a political purpose. But most of the time it was light or moderate so that nobody back home would sweat it and think anybody got blown up, you know, on our side anyway. Military seem to have, even though they're in the business of death, they have a reticence of acknowledging it.
lots of reporters made that claim. It's all a matter in the eye of the beholder.
From 1967 to 69, Major General Wynant Seidel was Chief of Information for MACV, the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. MACV conducted press briefings daily.
We didn't mention all those little battles that went on, and neither did the reporters. I used to chide them sometimes about not giving us some coverage on stories where we'd win a little battle, and they say, well, it wasn't worthwhile. But then, if it's a battle they attended and we didn't put it out on the air, they would get upset, so it's a matter of judgment.
Jordan St. John was an AFEN newscaster who began his tour in 1969.
For the first 3 or 4 months I was in Vietnam, I never checked a script with anyone. It was only after the anti-war movement was gaining power and gaining influence back in the United States did the military start to clamp down on what was being said. And it was the military lifers' fear that somehow that the sentiment of the war was turning against them.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Army Specialist Bob Lawrence with 5 minutes of news compiled from...
Anything that was critical of the Vietnamese government or the Vietnamese military or the American military or the execution of the war in Vietnam was taboo. We received the Cronkite show 2 days after it aired in the States, and we could use pieces off of that. But before the news guys got it, the captain would review the tape, and he would write down what the story was and whether or not we could use it.
Vietnam, the president warned there remains a long, hard road toward peace, but said he is not pessimistic about the results of his peace efforts.